Yesterday, inside a room filled with the smell of old books and quiet thoughts, a man with thick glasses sat in a chair, reading for the 1000th hour. Jesus stood in the soft light of the library beside him, watching Charlie mark the pages of history and science. He wasn't just looking for a way to pick a winning stock. He was looking for the lattice of truth. He realized that a mind is like a house, and if the foundation is weak, the whole building will fall. Before, the world thought success was about being the smartest person in the room. They thought it was about fast talk and complicated math. But Charlie, he was like a builder who knows that a straight line is better than a fancy curve. He didn't chase every new thing that glittered in the sun. He studied the mistakes of others, so he wouldn't have to make them himself. He didn't want to be a genius. He just wanted to avoid being a fool, day after day. He planted a seed of discipline. The gamblers on the street laughed because he was too slow to act. But Jesus stayed silent, watching the roots go deep into the earth. Because he knew the law of the mind. He who seeks understanding is richer than he who only seeks gold. Charlie didn't try to predict the weather. He just made sure his boat was strong enough for any storm. Charlie spends his life telling the hard truth, even when it hurts. He knows that a man who lies to himself is already lost. He kept his life simple and his thoughts clear, proving that the greatest wealth is a brain that can see reality. The years passed, and the world grew chaotic. In that moment, the man who never stopped learning understands that the ultimate victory is a life built on the rock of common sense. Years ago, inside a hospital hallway where the air was cold and the lights were dim, a man sat alone, holding the hand of his dying son. Jesus stood in the shadow of that heavy grief, watching Charlie face a pain that would break 1,000 men. He wasn't cursing the sky or asking, "Why me?" He was learning the hardest lesson of all. He realized that life does not promise comfort, but it demands courage even when the heart is torn in two. Back then, the world saw him lose his child, his money, and even one of his eyes. He walked the streets with a patch over his face and a burden on his back. But Charlie? He was like a soldier who keeps marching even when the battle is lost. He didn't let the bitterness poison his mind. He sat in the library and learned Braille, preparing for a world of darkness. He didn't want the pity of his neighbors. He wanted to prove that a man's spirit is not owned by his circumstances. He planted a seed of endurance. The people around him thought he was finished, broken by the weight of the cross. But Jesus watched him build a new life from the ashes. Because he knew the law of the desert. The fire that burns the weak only makes the gold more pure. Charlie didn't cry for a miracle. He worked for a solution, one day at a time. Charlie spends his life refusing to be a victim. He knows that feeling sorry for yourself is a trap that leads to nowhere. He kept his head high and his hands busy, proving that the greatest strength is a soul that refuses to quit. The darkness came, but it could not put out his light. In that moment, the man who walked through the fire understands that the ultimate character is forged in the things we lose. Today, inside a room where everyone is shouting about the next big win, Charlie sits in the corner, looking at a map of a shipwreck. Jesus stands in the quiet space beside him, watching Charlie list all the ways a man can lose his soul and his money. He isn't looking for the road to the mountaintop. He is looking for the holes in the ground so he won't fall in. He realized that if you want to be happy, you must first understand what makes a life miserable. Before, the world thought the only way to move was forward. They thought you had to follow the light of the crowd. But Charlie? He was like a man who reads a book from the last page to the first. He asked, what will kill this business, instead of what will make it grow? He studied the fools and the liars to know what to avoid. He didn't want to follow the herd into the sea. He wanted to stay on the shore and watch where the currents lead. He planted a seed of inversion. The clever men laughed because he was obsessed with failure. But Jesus smiled, because he knew the wisdom of the warning. A man who knows where the traps are is safer than a man who only sees the bait. Charlie didn't try to predict the future. He just tried to stay out of the way of the things that destroy it. Charlie spends his life telling people to invert, always invert. He knows that many problems are solved by looking at them from the back. He kept his eyes on the danger so he could find the peace, proving that the smartest way to win is to make sure you don't lose. The crowd rushed ahead and fell into the pit. In that moment, the man who looked backward understands that the ultimate guidance is knowing where not to go. Today, inside a glass building where men use complicated words to hide the truth, Charlie sits at a table and says exactly what is on his mind. Jesus stands in the bright light of the room, watching Charlie refuse to paint a gray lie into a white hope. He isn't trying to be polite or to win the favor of the powerful. He is keeping his internal compass pointed north. He realized that a man who lies to others eventually loses the ability to see the truth in himself. Back then, the world thought that a little cheating was just part of the game. They thought you had to hide the flaws to sell the dream. But Charlie, he was like a judge who knows that a crooked scale ruins the market. He admitted his mistakes as soon as he made them. He didn't want the money that came from a trick or a hidden fee. He didn't want to spend his life remembering his lies. He wanted the freedom of a mind that has nothing to hide. He planted a seed of integrity. The schemers laughed because they thought he was too blunt and too dry. But Jesus watched the trust of the world gather around him. Because he knew the law of the light. A house built on a foundation of truth will stand when the fog of lies clears away. Charlie didn't need a lawyer to check his soul, because his yes meant yes and his no meant no. Charlie spends his life proving that honesty is the best math. He knows that trust is the only asset that grows forever. He spoke the hard words even when it cost him a deal, proving that a clear conscience is worth more than a full vault. The empires built on secrets crumbled in the dark. In that moment, the man who never told a lie understands that the ultimate power is the peace of a transparent heart. Every morning, before the sun even touches the tops of the trees, Charlie is already in his chair with a book in his lap. Jesus stands in the quiet dawn beside him, watching a man who has lived 90 years still acting like a student. He isn't reading to pass a test or to show off at a party. He is feeding his mind so he can be a better servant of the truth. He realized that a brain that stops learning is like a garden that stops being watered. Back then, the world thought that once you were rich you could stop working. They thought you could sit on a beach and let your mind go soft. But Charlie, he was like a runner who never leaves the track. He carried a book with him everywhere, even to weddings and airports. He didn't want to waste a single minute on empty talk or idle gossip. He didn't want the treasures of the earth to make him lazy. He wanted to keep his tools sharp until the very last day. He planted a seed of consistency. The young men laughed because he spent his weekends studying old failures. But Jesus watched his wisdom grow while others grew old. Because he knew the law of the servant. He who is faithful with his time will be given the keys to the kingdom of understanding. Charlie didn't wait for inspiration to strike. He showed up every day and did the work that no one else wanted to do. Charlie spends his life proving that learning is a moral duty. He knows that you cannot help the world if you do not understand it. He read until his eyes grew tired and his hair grew white, proving that the greatest talent is the will to keep trying. The world changed fast, but he was always ready. In that moment, the man with the book understands that the ultimate wealth is a mind that stays hungry for the light. Today, in a world where men hide in small corners and call themselves experts, Charlie stands in the middle of a vast field, looking at everything. Jesus stands in the open air beside him, watching Charlie gather a stone from physics, a brick from biology, and a beam from history. He isn't trying to be a master of one small trade. He is trying to understand the whole design. He realized that a single lens only shows you a part of the truth, but 1,000 lenses show you the mind of the Creator. Before, the world thought you only needed to know one thing to be successful. They thought a doctor should only know medicine, and a banker only money. But Charlie, he was like a scout who maps the entire mountain, not just the path. He learned how the stars move and how the human heart fails. He didn't want to be a man with only a hammer, because he knew that a house built with only one tool would never stand. He wanted to see the connections that others missed. He wanted to see the world as it really is, not as he wished it to be. He planted a seed of multiple models. The narrow-minded men laughed because they thought he was wasting his time on things that didn't pay. But Jesus smiled, because he knew the strength of a broad mind. A man who understands the laws of many worlds can never be easily fooled. Charlie didn't wait for the experts to tell him the answer. He combined the wisdom of the ages to find the truth for himself. Charlie spends his life proving that wisdom is a big puzzle. He knows that every piece matters if you want to see the picture. He studied the world until he could see the patterns in the chaos, proving that the greatest clarity comes from looking at the whole. The specialists got lost in their own small rooms. In that moment, the man with the big map understands that the ultimate vision is seeing how everything is held together. Last winter, in a room where the ticking of the clock sounded like a slow heartbeat, Charlie sat in his chair watching the sun go down over the hills. Jesus stood in the quiet evening light beside him, watching a man who had used every minute of his 99 years. He wasn't afraid of the shadows or the coming silence. He was a traveler who had finished a long and useful journey. He realized that a life is not measured by its length, but by the honesty and the wisdom you leave behind for others. Back then, the world expected a great man to die with a heavy heart or a loud cry. They thought he would cling to his riches and his famous name. But Charlie, he was like a faithful servant who had done exactly what he was told. He had given his money away and shared his secrets with anyone who would listen. He didn't want a monument of stone or a parade in the streets. He wanted his children and his friends to keep the lamp of reason burning. He knew that a body might fail, but a true thought can live for 1,000 years. He planted a seed of eternity. The people mourned, thinking the world had become a darker place without him. But Jesus smiled, because he knew that Charlie had already won the race. While others spent their lives chasing shadows, Charlie had spent his life chasing the light of reality. He didn't need a miracle to save him from the end, because his whole life had been a miracle of discipline and truth. Charlie spends his last breath in a state of perfect peace. He knows that he did his best with the tools he was given. He closed his books and closed his eyes, proving that the greatest ending is a job well done. The news traveled fast, but the wisdom stayed behind. In that moment, the man who never stopped learning understands that the ultimate home is the truth that lasts forever.